Continuing a franchise 20 years later is like microwaving a frozen pizza. If I had to summarize Matrix Resurrections in one word, it would be goofy. Pretty much the whole time, it felt like watching a not very funny nor entertaining SNL skit. And we all know how bad and how cringy those things can get. The new Matrix is a bad parody of the original Matrix. Neo is a loser. Trinity is the new one, and there's no original Morpheus nor original Mr. Anderson. That fake Morpheus has nothing to do with the real one, played by Lawrence Fishburne. See, Neo became a Jedi Master in this film. He was almost as stunning and brave as Rey Palpatine because he was using force pushes in every fight. You know, let me actually take that back. He doesn't even fight. He moves around a bit with them jazz hands and then force pushes his way until the end. Oh, that's so brilliant. Let me just say this. None of the new cast members are memorable in the slightest. All of the somewhat decent parts are in the trailer. It's very obvious to me this movie was forced and slapped together real quickly. And let me say something else. The camera was shaking so much. It felt like I was Michael J. Fox on the Titanic. It was unwatchable. Part of me already knew that this movie was going to be a disaster. When I actually sat down and watched the Matrix Resurrections trailer for the first time, I said to myself, hand on heart, that they will make this so bad that the Matrix trilogy will now become a masterpiece. And call me Nostradamus, but I was right once again. Who would have expected differently in 2021? We can't have nice things in 2021. Another sequel that comes out years later that doesn't work because the originals were products of their time. Color me shocked. Insert surprised Pikachu face. Cut my legs off and call me shorty. It felt like I was watching Star Wars episodes 7, 8, and 9 all over again. I'm 100, actually scratch that, 1000% convinced that Hollywood is full of just incompetent psycho film directors. I just hope to live to see the day when someone will resurrect the Matrix, Star Wars, and Terminator in the way it so desperately needs. All those films were masterpieces in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but then they were followed by trash sequels. Everything that has a beginning has an end, and it has a sequel apparently now. This film, Matrix Resurrections, is another lazy cash grab, with its only ability, mind you, to call back to its illustrious original. Warner Brothers probably saved so much money by reusing footage from their earlier films. This movie is just abysmal. We have long since reached the point where big studios like Warner Brothers and Disney just don't care anymore. It's either the 745th superhero movie or a rehash of a cult classic. There's no need to bother putting any effort in the plot or the writing, etc. Enough idiots will lap it up to make a healthy profit. What a garbage state of affairs we're currently living in. Anyway, 23 years later, and I'm still waiting for a reason to think that the Wachowskis are more than just a one-hit wonder. To be fair though, The Matrix was never originally intended to have any sequels. It was the very idea of a perfect standalone story inspired by Ghost in the Shell. But in comes the elitist, fart-sniffing, Hollywood elitist, greedy fucking wankers. And suddenly it's lessened by a garbage sequel. Let's face it, ladies and gentlemen. After watching it twice, and yes, I watched it twice, the movie isn't fit enough to lace up the original's proverbial boots. Hugo Weaving dodged a bullet, and so did Lawrence Fishburne. And I'm just going to say it because nobody else will. It's been 2 years in a row where a hyped project by Keanu Reeves becomes a disappointment. First with Cyberpunk 2077, and now this. I'm seeing a disturbing trend. Now it all makes sense. Why their marketing was doing all of the talking for the film instead of the film doing that on its own. Every canned response from the cast during the interviews only helped show that there was not much in the way of real substance. Disappointing! Where I started to get nervous with this movie is when Keanu Reeves did an interview where he said they barely rehearsed any scenes because Lana Wachowski doesn't like to go through that. And they had a just do it attitude. Yeah, that's great directing. Go tell Spielberg or David Fincher that they shouldn't rehearse before they make their movie. They will spit in your face. Rehearsals is where you work out the kinks of your characters. That's where you ask yourself questions, and that allows you to flush out the material even more. If you don't do those things, you end up with very bland, shallow characters with no layers. Case in point, Matrix the Resurrections. Anyway, look, let's get to the film again. The whole point of the one is that Neo is that 0.1% of the 99.9% that can mold the Matrix to do whatever he wants. He is the anomaly. If they can both fly, then that makes them both anomalies in the system, which makes no sense. Trinity being important and even crucial to Neo being able to perform how he does is one thing, but making Trinity able to mold the Matrix to her design makes for two system anomalies, which ruins the story of the Matrix. There cannot be two ones. Anyway, let's get to my last point here. We went from one of the most perfectly choreographed fight scenes ever in the first Matrix to something that looks like what a 16-year-old would make in film school. What a raging dumpster fire. It had the fight editing of a bargain bucket Steven Seagal movie. I knew it was going to be bad without the legendary Yuen Woo Ping on board to direct the action scenes. And without him, that is a recipe for disaster. Because Lana Wachowski thought that she could shoot the action scenes by herself, which was a mistake. Just like everything else in this godforsaken movie. Bad action is enough to turn me off. Especially since the groundbreaking action was half of the original trilogy. Or rather the first two. And plus, what I hear a lot about how it's meta and postmodern and subversive and all those other hipster buzzwords are a big no-no for me. Anyway, look, this Matrix was made for this generation and not the one I grew up knowing. Most of the lazy millennials seem to like it, whereas the older generation does not. And by older generation, I mean anybody who's 25 years old and up and on that bombshell. The Matrix ended with Neo flying away from that telephone booth, Mannix out.